Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to speak to you today about something that even a few years ago, many people would have thought was impossible, and that's taking a cannabis-derived product through the FDA approval process. So I'm Alice Mead. I'm an attorney by training. I'm with GW Pharmaceuticals and its US subsidiary, Greenwich Biosciences. So GW was founded in 1998 in England by Drs. Jeffrey Guy and Brian Whittle, hence the GW. And they had sort of a perfect storm, in a good way, of experience that allowed them even to conceptualize and embark on what was a pretty audacious project in 1998, which was to develop a whole range of prescription medications derived from the cannabis plant, but developed in accordance with modern regulatory standards for pharmaceutical products. Our first product, Sativex, is a whole plant extract. Actually, it's derived from two extracts, one high in THC, one high in CBD. And of the primary cannabinoids, it's a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD, but we retain the other plant components. It's delivered as an oral mucosal spray, so absorbed by the mouth. And it's now approved in over 25 countries for the treatment of spasticity in multiple sclerosis. Not yet approved in the US, but we are about to start a US program. Our second product is Epidiolex. So it's a purified cannabinoid, cannabidiol. It's delivered as an oral liquid, 100 mg per mil. And it was approved, as Jonathan said, on June 25th of this year, for the treatment of seizures in two particularly devastating types of childhood onset epilepsies. So, for years I heard the mantra, quality, safety, and efficacy. That's what a product has to show to get through the FDA approval process. But it wasn't until we actually did it that I realized what robust meant. So if one wants to take a complex plant material, any plant, through the FDA approval process, FDA has given a helpful guidance to industry. And that guidance gives a little bit of leeway in the early stages of development, but by the time you get to late stage research, it's pretty much as strict as for any other new prescription medicine. And of course, you have to do big randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. Now, a purified product like Epidiolex isn't subject to the botanical guidance. It's just subject to all of the requirements for any new chemical entity. Now, what about quality? Well, this will seem familiar to many of you. We have an 11-week cultivation cycle. We grow our plants in computer-controlled glass houses, so all aspects of the cultivation cycle are standardized and controlled. We have our own natural growth medium that has no heavy metals. We don't use pesticides. We use biocontrols for insects. We propagate by clones. There's no genetic modification. And we grow for Epidiolex plants that are very high in CBD. So they're very efficient. So we don't actually need that much in the way of acreage. This is a 45-acre glass house in England. That's still a huge glass house, but it'll be sufficient for research and commercialization. So the various stages of manufacturing are rigorous. We have to have specifications all along the way, from the botanical raw material through the botanical drug substance, that's the sticky extract, to the finished product, the botanical drug product, and for a purified cannabinoid, specifications for the active pharmaceutical ingredient or the crystalline CBD, and the finished product. And those specifications have to be agreed by FDA. And of course, we have to test each batch and accept it or reject it based on the specifications. We have multiple in-process controls. We have to validate our analytical methods to FDA's satisfaction. We monitor for in Sativex, we monitor for more than 13 cannabinoids, and we characterize about 7 categories of other plant components. The level of impurities is established by the International Conference on Harmonization, or ICH, and FDA has adopted those guidance documents. So if an impurity, so particularly in a purified product, exceeds daily allowance for under ICH, we have to do animal toxicology studies to cover that level. We have to do stability studies. These usually take 2 to 3 years to cover the expiration date in both the active pharmaceutical ingredient and the finished drug product. We, of course, have a quality management system, and all the stages of manufacture have to be conducted under good manufacturing practices for pharmaceutical products, not for dietary supplements. That's a lot of paperwork, so the batch of one BRM would be botanical raw material was almost 180 pages long. We have to do extractables and leachable studies because cannabinoids tend to stick to containers. They also tend to pull molecules of certain types of containers out. All of our manufacturing sites and processes have to be inspected by the FDA, so the FDA doesn't just take our word for it that we do GMP. They come out and inspect. That usually takes 5 to 7 business days because they're looking really very carefully at everything. Then they go to our clinical operations site to look at the data we've collected from our clinical trial sites. Then they go to a number of the clinical trial sites to make sure that they've been following good clinical practices. Then, if we do get approval, it's not that easy to make a change. So if we want to make a significant change to our manufacturing process, FDA has to come back and inspect again. If we want to change the dosage form, so say from a liquid to a solid dosage form, well, we have to file a supplemental new drug application. We have to have chemistry and manufacturing control data. We have to have efficacy and safety data to show that it's bioequivalent. Same thing if we want to change it from an oral liquid to a spray bottle. We have to file a supplemental new drug application. And then there's safety. So FDA has a long list of animal toxicology studies that we have to conduct, and I won't go through all of them, but just the carcinogenicity studies take about 2 years. And the tricky thing about toxicology studies is that you have to be using the same material that is used in your later stage clinical trials, or you have to conduct bridging studies. We also need human safety data, at least 100 patient years, which can be hard to get in a short-term clinical trial. We have to collect and compile all of the side effects, from mild to severe, whether or not related to our product. We have to do drug-drug interaction studies, which is particularly important for CBD because it interacts with the superfamily P450 enzymes. We have to do food-drug interaction. We have to do studies in subjects that have kidney or liver impairment. We have to do a QT study, which is to see whether the product affects the heart. And then there's efficacy. So you've heard probably about phase 1 through 3. Phase 1 starting with healthy human subjects and in smaller numbers to get evidence of safety and some dose data, all the way through to phase 3, which are hundreds of patients, not subjects, to get the dispositive or pivotal evidence of safety and efficacy. And then after approval, FDA often requires additional studies to get longer-term evidence of safety and efficacy. And then what drug delivery system or dosage form should a person use in a clinical trial? That's tricky with cannabinoids. So as previous speakers have mentioned, you want to keep the patient in that therapeutic window where they're getting therapeutic benefit but without undue side effects. And the reason that's kind of tricky is that with cannabinoids, there's a lot of inter-subject variability. I think we've heard a lot about that in this conference. If you select a delivery system that causes a rapid rate of rise in the plasma of THC, you may cause CNS effects, central nervous system effects, and that can unblind and therefore invalidate your study. Cannabinoids don't really dissolve in water, so you need to come up with some vehicle that's appropriate. Oral products have their own challenges because that can be a longer and more unpredictable onset of action, and then it goes through the first pass metabolism in the liver to produce other metabolites. Cannabinoids are susceptible to degradation from heat and light, particularly the acid form. Usually we have to decarboxylate from the acid to the neutral, and that can be a step that's difficult to get exactly the same every time. Cannabinoids aren't very bioavailable, so you want to optimize the formulation. And then there's the placebo effect. Patients who know that the investigational product is a cannabinoid have a huge level of expectation, and that can result in a very large placebo response. And if the product's efficacy doesn't exceed its placebo response by a certain amount, you have a failed study. You really, by the time you get to phase 3, you get one bite at the apple, so it's really difficult to get it right. And then, all of this has to be done under Schedule 1. So everyone who handles the product from preclinical through phase 3 has to have a special DEA Schedule 1 research license called a registration, and usually a Schedule 1 research license from the state. And those two processes don't happen concurrently. Usually one goes first and then the other, so it can be quite prolonged. And then you really need to be able, if you are a US manufacturer, to cultivate a large quantity of exactly the same cannabis under exactly the same conditions, so you are using the same material for your phase 3 studies, your commercialized product, and your toxicology studies. And as we've heard, DEA has not yet licensed anyone to cultivate a large quantity of cannabis. Now, there is kind of a workaround. Cannabis preparation in finished form can be imported into the US for clinical trials and for commercialization, because the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs requirement that a national agency have exclusive control of the stocks doesn't apply to, for example, imported extracts or imported plant material. So Sativex and Epidiolex have both been imported into the US for research, and recently the University of California, San Diego was allowed to import an investigational product from Tilray. So it is possible to do research in the US with cannabis. And then, because cannabinoids come from the cannabis plant and they are active in the central nervous system, there has to be a full assessment of their abuse potential. So people say CBD is not psychoactive, but I believe we were probably the first ones to do a full battery of abuse liability studies to kind of tease that out. We did multiple receptor binding studies. We did multiple animal abuse liability studies. We did a special human abuse liability study in healthy recreational drug users. We did a human dependence and withdrawal study. We collected special side effects in our clinical trials. And then, of course, the product would have to be rescheduled. So we would take all of the data from the abuse liability studies and include it in our new drug application, along with something called an 8-factor analysis. Then FDA would look at all that data and make a scheduling recommendation to DEA. And then under a recent federal law, DEA has 90 days to issue something called an interim final rule, scheduling the product, and the product can be sold under that IFR. But if DEA decides that a treaty requires scheduling, then it will issue a final rule, not an interim final rule. So DEA did so with Epidiolex. It issued a final rule placing the substance CBD derived from cannabis having not more than 0.1% THC, and when incorporated into an FDA-approved product, into Schedule 5. And then you're still not done, because it has to be rescheduled under state law. So the states have their own version of the Controlled Substances Act, and under those laws, cannabis and its derivatives like CBD are in Schedule 1. This is even in states that have medical or adult use laws. Most of them just never rescheduled cannabis. So what that means is, even after doing all the hard work of getting it approved by FDA, approved by FDA and rescheduled by DEA, it couldn't be dispensed in any state until there were changes to state law. Now, those changes have no effect on existing state laws that allow access for medical or adult use cannabis. They just create a new track for a prescription medication. We think it's a big tent. We think there are a lot of options for patients to choose under the tent, but we think it is important for patients to have the option of a prescription medicine. So thank you very much for your attention.